Andy, I'm just going to say a bunch of stuff here and then take it where you'd like, because I think this is a very interesting conversation. Really interested to get your take on it, both from an earnings standpoint for Salesforce and its quarter, but also this potential acquisition that we're expecting an announcement for. From a game theory standpoint, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, to me, it does seem like something based off the timing that they could be trying to slip something past the goalie on a disappointment. But at the same time, this is also the move that a company that's really, really executing well could do. I mean, this is a massive, one of the biggest software acquisitions that we'll ever have seen in history at around $25 billion. So both sides of the coin here for Salesforce, but certainly going to be an interesting quarter at what's been kind of a roller coaster year around earnings for Salesforce.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there. I think Salesforce, were it not for this Slack acquisition rumor, I would look at Salesforce a lot the same way we just looked at Zoom, and that is the company saw exceptional growth, unbelievable growth as people started to move to work from home, started to set up home offices, kind of got the ball rolling with quarantines and so on. They saw a nice pull forward of demand, and now we're starting to see that soften, and we actually see it down 8% year over year. So we would expect to see this down on a quarter over quarter basis, because it's really difficult to maintain those extremely high levels of adoption. But the fact that we're looking down year over year and that the current quarter is pacing down tells me that there was some significant pull forward in demand, which can lead to unhappy investors, as we saw with Zoom today, down significantly. So very parallel in terms of that story. But what I look at with the Slack potential acquisition kind of changes the entire conversation, as we can see in the news cycle. It's what we're going to be talking about mostly with Salesforce today, and I think what people will be talking about tomorrow. And the one thing I would say there is we're seeing the same thing in Slack. When we look at Slack consumer purchase intent mentions, so people talking about using Slack, downloading the app, starting an account, starting to pay for Slack, we see that also soft on this quarter and kind of looking ahead. And so we think that both of these companies have gone through a significant pull forward in demand, and that both companies could be in for a little bit of a tough road, uphill battle in terms of satisfying Wall Street expectations. And now when you put on top of that Slack being expected to be acquired, then there is significant risk for this company, I think, over the next few days, if there isn't an acquisition, or even if the acquisition is announced at a price that isn't quite what Wall Street has expected so far.
Yeah, Andy, I think that the volatility around this name and the volatility around Slack and Salesforce is kind of taking over this earnings announcement. But Salesforce, when I look at this and the earnings beat that they had a quarter ago, which was gargantuan in terms of the beat, what your data is saying, correct me if I'm wrong, your data is saying that there's been a little bit of drop off from those peak levels of stay-at-home trade and things like that. But what I look at is, the stock's $40 some off its high, $44 off its high, but still making, your numbers and Salesforce that are dropped off are still a lot higher than they were, several months ago, or moderately higher than they were even at those lower levels off that peak. So how much has this dropped off? Or if you look a year back, is it still higher than it was a year ago? So is it still making progress, or has the drop off been more significant?
No, it's actually lower than it was a year ago. When we look at Salesforce, down 8% year over year. So it's not just a quarter over quarter fall. Those are quarterly bars on that chart, and an 8% year over year decline, which is fairly new territory for Salesforce, and I think does run the risk of disappointing some Wall Street investors. But as far as the Slack acquisition goes, Kevin, I think that you hit the nail on the head with, first of all, Salesforce is a very good acquirer. They're good at this. They do this often, and they tend to know what they're doing when they do it. And I think with Slack, the difference is they're not just getting software with this acquisition. They're getting an enormous user base, and a significant portion of that user base is likely not yet a Salesforce customer, or at least not at the higher levels of Salesforce offerings. And so I think that there's significant opportunity for Salesforce to expand its market presence and its market share through this acquisition by slowly integrating some of its features into the Slack platform, which is, as we know, is extremely popular with users.
Andy, sticking on that front, obviously, looking at the data that you have just on Salesforce, looks like revenue estimates actually expected to grow 16% flat year over year for earnings. So pretty wide divergence from what you're seeing in your data. But focusing in on the Slack side of things, we've often talked with you, with Landon, that Slack just seemed like a takeover target at some point, given its single kind of service, its popularity, but its kind of inability to maybe really fight the in corporations versus something like Microsoft that has a relationship on so many different grounds. I got to be honest, I didn't see Salesforce as the buyer, but when I saw it, my thought was similar to what you just laid out. It's interesting. I can see the synergies. Does this make Salesforce, a much more formidable kind of, competitor to somebody like Microsoft, where before they kind of could exist together as they weren't really, infringing on each other's businesses?
Yeah, well, I think that this is the perfect acquirer for Slack. I don't think that anyone else would be able to probably pay the price that it sounds like Salesforce is willing to pay for this. I don't think that anyone would be able to integrate without diminishing something else that they own, without cannibalizing something else that they own, which Microsoft would have to do. As far as competition with Microsoft,
Right.
I'm not really sure I see that too much. It does put them a little bit more in the same on the same playing field, but Slack's overall mission is quite different than Microsoft's. I think the key thing to take away from this is that companies that have subscription payment models and subscription revenue tend to like other companies that have subscription revenue because it's a superior business model, and Salesforce can take advantage of that and can layer on other opportunities for those users to pay them through their other services in a really big way. And so I think, the risk on the Slack side, I think I want to make sure, is kind of the key takeaway for me for this entire program and this entire merger talk, is when an acquisition is so well, makes so much news, is so discussed prior to the actual event. It's pretty rare that the people buying into that late on that news make any money. And the risk on the Slack side of the equation is very high because I don't think that there's a better buyer out there. And if this deal falls apart, it could be a very, very significant whiplash effect for Slack shareholders. And even if it goes through, I'm not sure that the upside is that considerable outside of saying, I want to own Salesforce stock. Kind of back to Evelyn's point. If you want to be a part owner of Salesforce, then absolutely this could be a great way to do it. But otherwise, just buying Slack here for the potential of a merger upside, I think that ship has kind of sailed.